Anybody know who this guy is? No. Maybe. It is Carl Jung. He was a contemporary of Freud's. While Freud was obsessed about, sex and other things, Carl Jung was a bit of a tripper himself. He was into the global consciousness and your id and interpreting your dreams. So I figured, I don't have the pipe yet, but I'm working my way up to the grey hair. So I reckon he's not a bad buy to his wife. But he wasn't constrained by what people thought should work. He would look for just whatever would help. Right. So what I'm going to present to you today, the solution-focused approach, is only one approach to finding solutions to solving problems. It is not the only approach, and it's about the right tool for the right job. You've got to use it in the right situation. It's one of my favourite quotes from Star Trek. You hear it, especially in that Scottish accent. The right tool for the right job. And I particularly like this guy. Anybody hammered in a nail with a screwdriver? No, we've all tried it. Couldn't find the right tool. So I'll tell you about what type of problems we're going to apply this to. So pick the right tool for the job. So I think anybody at Agile Australia earlier this year? From what I saw in the videos, almost every slide had something about the difference between a complicated problem and a complex problem. It seemed to be the topic of the conference, but I'll give you the Cliff Note version of it. So complicated, even if there's many moving parts, there's still a limited number of options, and there is a clear relationship between cause and effect. Pull that lever, something happens. Cause and effect. Things like a flat tyre. You can be positive all you like about that, but until you fix the flat tyre, it's not going to go away. It's a mechanistic problem. There is a simple cause and effect. And as much as our software is complex, software bugs are generally a cause and effect. Somewhere in there, there's an issue. You've got to use problem analysis, root cause analysis to find the cause of that problem. So those ones. Then you've got complex issues. Anybody recognise this game? I know some people will.
Sure.
The game of Go. It's well, calling it the Eastern version of chess would be a disservice. It's actually a very, very complex game, and it's how Japanese people learned strategy. And during the World Wars, they couldn't, the Western Allies had trouble figuring out the Japanese strategy until they overlaid it on a Go board. And then suddenly, actually, we get how they're thinking now. But it's a very complex game, and computers haven't beat humans in that yet. Whereas chess, because there's a limited, finite number of things you can do, computers have been able to beat it. Traffic, I heard traffic was a bit of an issue this morning. Trains, trams, public transport. No simple cause and effect. There's a great story about Germany where they were trying to figure out what caused traffic jams, and of course they spent a lot of time trying to figure out cause and effect. But when they investigated when was there less traffic jams, when did traffic jams not spontaneously develop, when they were looking for the solution, they found that it was when people went slower and they didn't touch a brake light, didn't cause a thing. So by looking for what they wanted, they found they were able to reduce the speed limit and reduce these spontaneous traffic jams that occurred. But they didn't do it by root cause analysis. And then people, I think economics has almost let go of the idea that we make decisions rationally. They're all little perfect econs that only make things and choices in our own self-benefit. I think they've dropped that idea now. There's actually some great research to say that we all make emotional decisions and use logic to justify them. I aspired to be Spock, didn't quite work. All right, but what is actually the difference then between a problem focus, which is what you'd use for complicated problems, and a complex approach? Just have a look at these different questions. It's actually interesting to be able to stand between two projectors and not having flash in your eyes. So things like what's wrong, what needs fixing, unfortunately tends to get down to whose fault is it, who did something wrong. You're looking for something that happened in the past. You're not necessarily drawing on the future. You end up with experts and best practices. Yeah, Dan.
Are you going to make the slides available?
Yes, definitely.
Just so
Yeah, save scribbling down. And I'd love to see any sketch notes if someone does, because I love those. But yeah, experts and best practices. Because I solved this problem over here, I think I know how to solve every other problem. Even if they're not quite the same as that problem, I'm going to make my solution fit that problem because I've decided that's a best practice. Complications. There's this great scientific study about two people. We as humans actually think complicated means better. It's one of our cognitive biases. And there's this great study with two cell researchers that were put into separate rooms and told to figure out the rules for identifying a healthy cell. So one guy over here, because they get feedback every time they made a choice. Is this a healthy cell? Yep, reckon it is. No. And after a while, this one guy, call him Bob, he figured out that a couple of simple rules and I know how to identify a healthy cell. Tim over here, he had a much harder time because he was getting Bob's results. So every time he ticked to say, I think that's a healthy cell, he'd get the result from Bob over there. So he's sitting there going, I just can't figure it out, and it must be hard, and he's come up with this sort of complex series of things that he thinks determined a healthy cell. Now, great, that's a fixed outcome. What a sneaky thing they did. Psychology studies always got a sneaky bit in it. Anybody notice that? They'd send them to a coffee break, get them to compare notes. Bob over here goes, oh yeah, I reckon it's just these three things. That's how I determine it. Tim goes, really? No, it's not that simple. Here's my complex list. This is how I determine it. Bob was like, gee, that's actually quite impressive. Yeah. So they go back, and Bob's trying to use Tim's rules because he thought they were better, and it's starting to get more wrong results. But he was seduced by the complication. So the more complicated the theory, it must be better. Just be aware of that in your own cognitive bias. Or our cognitive bias. Solutions focus. What's wanted versus what's wrong, what's working, collaboration and progress, and resources and strengths. I find this really interesting. Where have we already got something somewhere in our life or somewhere in our organisation, somewhere in a team that can help us do this? And keeping it as simple as possible, so not going into complex theories and analysis, and actions. This is where there's a bit of overlap with lean. I find is quite interesting, the idea of taking an action to get feedback. Because in a complex system, you don't actually know. You might have a strong correlation, but you don't actually know if that action is going to give you the result you want. The only way to do is experiment. Do an action. Did we get more of what we wanted or less of what we wanted? So different ways of looking at things. Now, the benefits of solution-focused approach is that you can envision a desired future and move towards it. And I had a great question the other day, do you have to have a problem to apply this approach? What do you reckon about that? Do you have to have the problem to apply this approach? Because we're about, isn't this finding solutions, isn't that the same as solving problems? And the answer is actually no, you don't, because you always want to get better. You always want to move towards something that you want. So I found that a really fascinating question. You don't necessarily have to have a problem to apply this approach. You can always envision a more desired future, something that you want further from there. Yeah, an approach for problems that don't have simple cause and effect. If you're struggling with it, you're trying to find the root cause, it's probably not the right approach. Works with individuals, teams and organisations. And the engineer, they reckon the joke between engineers will use something that's useful. Scientists figure out how that works. So the engineer in me loves the fact that it's a pragmatic approach. There is no theory yet behind why this works. It's been working for 30 years. They still don't know why it works, and it hasn't stopped people using it and finding it useful. But some people after presenting this, they go, I love it that you focus on the positive. For me, it's pragmatic. For me, this gets me what I want. This helps me move forward. Whether it's positive or not, I don't really care. So I think it's useful that it creates motivation and a lot of other side effects, but that's not the main reason for using it. All right, now, I've already I'm starting to have a conversation with you guys, and as we go along, we're going to ask more questions, and you're going to be able to apply this to your solution. But the way I'm presenting these tools is that you are probably having a conversation with somebody. You're having a conversation with a friend, with a team member, with a child, with a partner. So think about this as a conversation that you're having with somebody. And again, solutions-focused approach, one of the concepts about this is you're staying on the surface. So a conversation, we talk about what's more interesting between two people's noses than between their ears. So this is an external sort of way of working with people. So keep that in mind. You're using this as a conversation. Now, have you thought of something you want to apply this to? Because this is your first warm-up exercise we're going to do in a sec. Have you thought of something you want to try this to? Give you a sec. Yeah. Some of you are going, oh, I wouldn't work for that. Let's give it a go. All right, so let's try problem talk. So run through those questions based on the problem you're trying to solve. Like I said, this is just a warm-up. But ask yourself those questions with respect to the problem you've identified. And I won't leave you there too long because it's just fascinating when you do this exercise. The whole room goes, like, feels a bit like this. And I'll just keep doing it. And everybody's energy just drops. They feel really tired. Let's try it the other way around. Let's try asking these questions now with respect to your problem.
Feeling better.
Yeah, it's amazing. No one's energy drops. Everybody can. But keep going. Spend a few more minutes on it. Like I said, we've got plenty of time. I've got 6 tools to present, so you're going to have plenty of time to work with. Bless you. I just realised I'm not using the mic. Anyone having trouble hearing me? Cool. Might just not come up on the recording. How did that feel? Feel like you got sort of some more ideas you could use? Maybe something popped up, maybe it didn't. But it did actually just feel different in taking that approach. Like I said, it's different. Nobody's energy went like this and dropped down. All right, I'm going to run through a couple of principles on the solution-focused approach, some of the underground foundational ideas. And again, even just keeping these concepts in mind when you're moving forward will help you with different solutions before we get to the specific tools that we're going to apply. All right, you're going to see this character pop up every now and then. I don't quite know where he comes from, but you know, he's all right. So change is happening all the time. Our goal is to be a solution detective and actually find the changes that we want and how to do more of it, amplifying that useful change. And we've got to be a bit of a Sherlock Holmes and dig in there and find it sometimes. Sometimes it's not obvious. But most of the tools we're going to have are for trying to find that useful change. And isn't that a different approach, concept to we're trying to find the problem, what's the problem, as opposed to what's useful, how can we do more of it? My role in IT sometimes is business analyst. So this next one is kind of putting myself out of a job. So a detailed understanding of the problem is usually little help in arriving at the solution. We're talking about complex problems where the cause and effect are not related. You don't quite know how it's going to behave if you change something. So a detailed understanding of the problem is usually little help in arriving at the solution. Now, anybody, people who work for consulting companies that come in and do 6-month studies and will deliver you a 100-page report about why the culture in your company is so terrible, they really don't like this slide. Because, that's 6 months of studies and investigation and, they got paid a nice, healthy sort of consulting fee for that. Or they could have actually had a couple of solution-focused meetings and probably made more progress in a couple of weeks. And there's actually a case study from someone, one of my colleagues who uses this in Europe at the moment, where he's dealing with this cement company, and they want the 6-month analysis. And he's going, can we just have 1 or 2 workshops before you kick that off? No, we've got to understand this problem. We need to. Would you like to sort of improve things while you're doing that? No, we must have. Sometimes we're entrenched in our way of thinking. But yeah, really interesting idea. Anybody get stuck in our own heads, trying to overanalyze a problem. Why won't this work? What's the problem? What's wrong with me? We all do a bit of that. So again, some of these questions can be used. And by the way, I'm my best customer, my best client for a lot of this work. In fact, I think it was the previous slide, finding useful change and doing more of it. The question about what would be the smallest thing that counted as progress actually helped me dig myself out of about 100 grand of debt. I was somebody who had 5 or 6 credit cards and was paying one off with the other. And I was seriously at a point like, I don't know what I can do. What's the problem? Oh, I need to make more money, all this sort of thing. And I asked that question, what would be the smallest thing that felt like progress? And I came up with just putting $1 above the minimum payment on a credit card. If I could put $1 above the minimum payment on a credit card, that would feel like I was actually spiralling up versus spiralling down. And of course, if you can put $1 on, then maybe you put 2 on the next time around. And within 3 or 4 years, yes, I did improve my income and everything else, but that did actually start to spiral up. Welcome, come in. So yeah, don't underestimate this. Come through. All right. No problem is always all the time. This is something that I think was the first thing I ever took away when I came across this approach about 10 years ago or more. No problem's always all the time. Anybody addicted to the odd substance? There's smoking, there's alcohol, sugar, chocolate, coffee, pizza. No, none of us. Oh, good. But are there some days where you don't do as much of that bad behaviour as others? So with alcoholics, there are some days they drink less than others. What's different about those days? Because we've got less of the problem, more of what we want. Let's investigate those days. And that's different for each person. Somehow that person has found a way to get rid of the problem themselves, their own strategy to improve things. So let's investigate that, find out what that is, find a way to do more of it. Rather than 2 to 5 years on a couch going, it might be something to do with your father, but we're not sure. What's different on the days where you get more of what you want and less of the problem? Now, anybody been through annual performance review lately? We've had a lot where I work. Yeah. How enjoyable were those? Here's all the things you did wrong this year. Here's why we're not going to give you a pay rise. You walk out of that going, oh, I love my job. No. Imagine if you perform, your performance over the year, ups and downs. We all have good, bad days. And at the end of the year, they just give you this average. And I'm not a fan of averages anymore because you lose information. You lose these differences that are important. Because some days, you were better than others. You were doing something right. Probably something your employer wants more of. So what was different on those days? What was I doing right? And how can I do more of it? So there's actually a tool, I'm not presenting it today, but it's about solution-focused performance reviews that really goes into how to explore those things and do more of them. All right.
Can you share that?
I can.
Can you switch to that talk?
Basically, that graph summarises it, but there's not much more detail. All right, anybody play golf? Some have attempted it, like me. I lost 4 balls off the first tee. Anyway, but when you're lining up to hit a ball, the difference between 1 mil that way and 1 mil that way. What's the difference down the fairway? A long, long way. Now, when I was working in private practice, some clients would come in and they had a traumatic life, but some of them wanted the cathartic healing. Oh my God, I'm healed from the angels and I'm fine. And great, that is sometimes needed. But other people, we did, a session or 2, bang, that much, further down the track, everything else corrected. And my experience out of that is don't judge the shift by the drama. Seriously, some people want the drama, you don't necessarily need it. That small change taken down for a long way can make a big difference. Don't judge the shift by the drama. Unless you really want the drama. But how much of that drama is in large organisations, in a team, in an order? Oh, we've got to come in and do this cultural change program. Really, what about we just nudge something that way and just see what a difference that makes? And I'll come back to that. But the idea of a small change, if you're asked to do a tiny little thing differently and you came up with it, is there going to be much resistance around doing that? If you came up with it and it's something that's pretty much a no-brainer, you're probably going to make that change, aren't you? Or you've already done that once.
Was that shift or shit?
Shift. Don't judge the shift by the drama. But yeah, a small change, there's very little resistance, or there's ideally no resistance. It's only when you have a big change, we all do it. Oh, it's going to be different. I don't know how this is going to affect everything. But a small change, something you've come up with, something you're going to do differently, you're not going to get much resistance there. All right, the next slide. We could actually stop the talk after this one, because all the tools I'm going to present after this are just refinements on this. So, this is what the Solution Focused Brief Therapy team came up with. And initially, they had, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, that one's a classic. You go into a psychologist or a coach and say, oh, I want some help with my public speaking. Oh, that must be because you've got low self-esteem. Oh, we'll need to spend some time exploring your childhood. All this no, I just wanted help with public speaking. So maybe that's an issue, maybe not. But initially what they did is they had these the other way around. They thought it was more important to stop doing things and do something different. And again, refinement. They actually found that this is more important. Finding evidence of what you want and how to do more of it is actually more useful, and occasionally you need to do this. But yeah, I could kind of stop there. Knock off early, we'll go for lunch. But I've got to give you more. It's actually the rest of the tools are more detail about how to do that, how finding out what works and to do more of it. And this is kind of the summary screen. So we're going to go through 6 different tools. What's actually wanted? What would life be like without the problem? That's future perfect. Scale. Scale is great. I'm an engineer in IT. Everything's black and white, 0 and 1s. Scaling actually helps you break that apart. Counters. I'll talk about that. Affirms and small actions I've already mentioned. Now, again, we get to do some work. So have you got that issue in mind that you thought up you want to apply these tools to? And we've got plenty of time to do it, so you really get a chance to go to town on this. So establishing a platform for change. Now, again, please, engineer here, I just want to get straight to fixing the problem. Empathy first. That sounds tough. You sound like you're having a rough time. The oldest form of therapy is listening. Sometimes all you got to do is hear them out. So make sure you listen first. It's very important. We all skip that. Yeah, I've got, they tell me what they want, I'll just skip over it. But empathy first, please. And then after they've talked for a while, you've got a chance to hear them out. Start turning the conversation around to what do they want instead? And you might actually need to have a few goes at this. Remember I talked about before where everything sucks, the whole company's going to hell. Well, what would you like instead? I don't know, but the whole company's going to hell. So you might have to kind of steer it round a few times to get to that idea about what's wanted. Now, the other thing I love about this idea is it's direction, not a goal. There's so much stuff out there in coaching and organisational change, in business commitments. You set a goal, you commit to it, you run hard at it, you don't change it for anything, you must hit your goal. Really, if I'm starting from here, my goal's over here, and I get this far, my goal might have changed. My goal may not make sense anymore. I may have got enough, that may be enough right there. So it's a direction, not a goal. Keep that in mind. It really helps because I always found goal setting a struggle. It never quite worked for me. Now, it is a good idea to figure out, are there any benefits to actually what you want? It helps with motivation. What would be the benefit of actually achieving that? And the last one is really important. Going back to my, I may or may not have had this sort of or attempted this type of conversation at a bar with some people who tended to be in the bar every night. And it was a really good test about whether people wanted to do anything or not. So this last one, is there a willingness to take action? Because sometimes people are happy to complain. Good, listen to them, empathise with them, and then if you ask. So in the course of our conversation, if we were to come up with a couple of small actions, would you be willing to take them? If the answer is no, stop there. Seriously, save yourself the hassle. Anybody heard about, trying to teach a pig to sing? Frustrates you and annoys the pig? Because the pig is never going to do it, all right? So trying to force somebody else to change if they're not willing to be involved in the solution is trying to teach a pig to sing, all right? Don't do it. You'll just get frustrated. You'll annoy them. But ask the question, qualify them. if we come up with some small in the course of our conversation, you come up with some actions, would you be willing to take them? That's the question. Good qualifying question. Now, on the problem that you want to work on, have a think through that. Think about what it is you actually want instead of the problem. And we're going to expand this in the next tool as well. And think about what are some of the benefits you might have. I'll give you a few minutes to do this. Take some notes. And, I mean, one way of identifying it is just kind of like putting a movie title on the problem. Yeah, I want my kids to do their homework. Right, and the last time I presented this, one bloke came up to me and he said, I got my daughter to do her homework. It's fantastic. So, put a title on what you want. You don't need a lot of detail just yet. And then some of the benefits around it. Some of you are like, what? I feel like I'm back in the lecture theatre. I'm trying to take notes. All right, and then ask yourself, are you the one who can take action? Are you the one that can do something? Because sometimes, they've got the problem. But again, coming back to the interaction, well, what would you like to be different in your interaction with that person? One of the examples where I've used this approach is dealing with a stakeholder on a project. We just couldn't get any of their time. We couldn't get responses. We couldn't get, any involvement. It's really hard to do a project when you can't get the stakeholders' time. So we worked with the team and went, okay, where has there ever been good interaction with this guy? Well, it seemed to be he'll actually respond to emails more than telephone calls. It always goes to voicemail. Righto. And is there a time where he's more responsive to emails than others? Well, yeah, if we get him first thing in the morning before 9, we tend to get a response straight back. All right, so we know before 9 in the morning, email, we're getting a good response from this guy. Let's do more of that. And over the weeks, as we built that up, then we found he got more responsive later on through the day. And he would actually return phone calls and emails. But it all came down to, rather than should he have coaching, should he go and do a people skills course, just working out how our interaction could be different. And we built on that. All right, the next tool, called Future Perfect. It's actually one of the things that Solution Focused Approach is known for. It's something called the miracle question. But sometimes all we can see is the problem. There's that big pile of problem in front of us, and that's all we can focus on. Like for me, how can I get out of debt? How can I get out of debt? It's all about the debt. I've got to get rid of my debt. All I could see was the problem. Is that helping me get to a solution or not? So there's a technique here where we take out the how-to just for a moment so we can explore the future without the problem. So we borrow a guy with a bit of magic here, a bit of Harry Potter. Problemless finishes. Future perfect. And the idea is that you can let go for a moment. It's either magic, it's a miracle. Somehow the problem goes away. You're not responsible for it. It's a miracle. Anything's possible. What would be different if that occurred? And we set this up in an interesting way. Suppose the problem went away overnight. There's actually quite a longer version of that. And I'll do it at the end of this slide, and then you guys can apply it. So. But anyway, suppose the problem went away overnight. How would you know? And I've used really short version of this sometimes in a conversation. So what would be different if the problem went away? Oh, this, and this. Oh, I've got it. And that was the end of the conversation. So. But this is where you really get to explore what would be different. What would you notice was different? And we're outside our head, we're in between people's noses. Describe concrete observable behaviours. Oh, well, if the problem went away, I'd be happy. How would someone know you were happy? Oh, well, I'd have a bounce in my step, and I might even be smiling. Great. Those are external things that other people can notice. So we're focusing on those externally observable things. from different points of view. This is quite fun because you can do other people's point of view. What would your boss notice? What would your colleague notice? What would your cat or dog notice? But I was working with somebody just recently in a coaching role. They'd been long-term unemployed and lived alone. So I was trying to think, who else's perspective could I get? And I did use a video camera. Okay, if there was a video camera mounted in your unit, what would be different? What would you see on that video camera about your behaviour? But then I also went, well, if you're applying for jobs a lot of the time, what would your computer notice was different if you were chasing a job? The computer would notice that I'm typing faster. The computer would notice that I'm watching less YouTube videos. The computer would notice that I'm sending more emails rather than just surfing job sites. And then we shifted to his mobile phone. What would your mobile phone notice was different? Well, I'd be making more calls rather than just waiting on calls. So all of those were actions that he could take that were externally observable that would have an effect moving towards his solution. Now, these last two bits. What else? When I'm working with a client one-on-one or with the team, for Future Perfect, it's 2 to 3 pages of notes. All right. And when I first learned about this technique, I got taught you ask what else again and again and again until the thought of asking what else one more time just makes you cringe, and then you ask it one more time. So it's a lot of detail. But you're also, if you're working with somebody, you're the coach applying this, give them time to think. Be okay with the silence. Some people find that hard. So what else would be different if this problem went away overnight? And shut up. And let them think about it. And eventually you do get to a point, well, no, I actually don't think there's anything different. But anybody got teenagers? What's their first response? I don't know. That just means I need more time to think. So don't let them get away with that. Just, oh, yeah. And again, hold the silence, hold the space for them. They'll come back for you. All right, so keeping in mind your own problem now, I'm going to ask the long version of this question. So imagine the rest of this day goes well, you have a wonderful time at the conference, do whatever you're going to do tonight, have a few drinks afterwards to unwind, go home tonight, do whatever you normally do, it's part of your evening to unwind. You go to bed tonight, and while you're asleep, unbeknownst to you, problem vanishes, miracle occurs, problem goes away. But you don't know yet because you're asleep. When you wake up in the morning, when you open your eyes, what would you notice was different had your problem gone away, had it vanished? So take a few minutes now, write down as many things you can think of. What would be different if this problem vanished overnight? You don't know how. You're just looking at how what's different now it's gone away. What would you notice was different? What would somebody who observes you, sees you, notice was different? We've used a car as well. What would your car notice was different? If your emotional state is different, how would others know your emotional state is different? What else? it's actually, most people get too fixated on the problem, and this helps you leapfrog that problem and actually explore the solution. And this actually gives you a really large menu of things you can look for that are part of the solution.
I took me that halfway through. It was really good. Like, just as I started writing, like, what are we trying to do? Well, hang on, yeah, it's that whole, you're really setting that vision and understanding what is the end state, what do we need to do to get to that point. So, yeah, very cool.
This is helping us to understand what things to look for, so we then can amplify them later.
Yes,
Right.
very much. Yes. Thank you for asking the questions. All right, and I'm actually loath to interrupt you. Like I said, this is 2 to 3 pages worth of stuff if you do it, but I got to keep cranking. So, and this is, anybody play board games, checkers, anything like that? Right. These are called counters, and the guys who actually came up with the solution-focused organisational change technique called them counters because they were trying to be smart. They were trying to, like, what counts towards the solution, what is counter to the problem. It sounded really smart, but in non-English languages it really sucks. So, but anyway, this question, when does the future perfect happen even a little bit? Now you've got an idea what the ideal world looks like, what life is like without the problem. So where is there already evidence of that occurring? How did you make that happen? And then, again, that's sort of 70-80% of what you can dig into. But you can also ask, where in life have you overcome similar problems? And I love this question because so many people don't look outside or really broadly across their life to where they've solved things. The mother of 3 kids thinks she knows nothing about project management. Do you think she knows how to manage a budget, to get the kids somewhere on some time, to manage resources? All of those things relate to project management, and you may not have occurred to you. So be broad, explore where in your life. Now sometimes things are really bad. Maybe someone's just died, and empathise first. Really sorry to hear that. A solution-focused question you can ask then is, so how have you been coping? Because coping is a skill. Coping is a strength. You are doing something to get through your day. How are you coping? And then looking for more resources. Who believes you can do this? What other resources do you have that can help? I've actually added that question now into our card kickoffs in our Agile stand-up in the morning. When we kick off a card, I ask that, what other resources do we know of or would we like that can help? And every so often somebody goes, oh, actually Bob knows more about that. Actually, we'll have a quick chat to him before we start this card. I really love that idea. And a lot of the time people go, nah, we're right. But looking for anything else that can help us move forward. What other resources? So things that count towards the solution. Resources, skills, know-how, expertise, strengths, attitudes, ideas. Anything else. I wrote a post on the next blog, on the REA Tech blog, about using this for retros. And some guy was commenting on it and saying, oh, it's all about strengths. It's all about strengths. Oh, it's great that you're using this tool to discover your strengths. And I went, but aren't strengths only one type of resource? It could be many others. It could be money, could be time, could be friends, could be, I don't know, dog, could be some other skill you have. So anything that helps, anything that counts towards the solution. So did those 2 slides prompt any ideas, any counters that you could think of? Just jot down anything that came up there. Give you a minute or 2. Now I am presenting these in somewhat of an order in terms of the tools, and this is the conventional way if you like to apply them. It's not a bad way to apply them when you're first getting started, but you can use them in any order, you can use them individually. So don't think that you have to do them in this order, because maybe you're just having a quick conversation with somebody and you haven't had a chance to explore the miracle question. Great, what's helping you achieve what you want? That's a counter question. You can just throw that in straight away. So don't think that you have to use these in this order. Just happens to be the way I'm presenting. You can use them anywhere, anytime. I actually did a whole coaching session with somebody, and we got to the end and talked about what they actually wanted, which was the platform. So I know we'd been talking about it, but I didn't actually confirm it until the end. So yeah, don't think you actually have to do these in this order. A few people are still writing. Alright, next tool is certainly one of my favourites. I find I use this frequently. So remember scaling. This just gets you into grey thinking and away from black and white thinking. So much of the time I'm like, well, I either got to do this or this. But if I can find a scale to explore, suddenly I have a lot more room to move, a lot more leeway. So future perfect, if you've done it, is your 10. If not, it's just the best you can think of it being. And down the bottom of the scale is the worst. The problem is, or the opposite of the future perfect. And guess what? You don't have to be too specific about it. We just intuitively get scales. I don't know how, so don't get too hung up on how bad this is. But it's kind of, the worst you can think of. I use this for feedback quite a lot. In an interview the other day, actually we were doing a one-on-one feedback session, that's what it was, and I said, okay, scale from 0 to 10, where would you rate me? And they go, oh, I said, no, 10 is your ideal person that you're dealing with, 0 is, I'm not even in this role, where would you give me a number? And guess what, the number is actually not that important. It's more about the questions we're going to ask with respect to that, but it is a subjective number. So doing with this with a team, again, I published a post on the REA Techlog website about using just this tool, and the next one, for retro format. Works really well because you can ask the whole team. All right, last 2 weeks since we last had a retro, 10 being our best 2 weeks that we've ever had, 0 being the worst, or we didn't deliver anything, or however you want to define it. Pick a number. Everybody in the team picks a number. I don't actually get them to put it up on the board or even tell anybody about it because it's actually the questions we're going to ask with respect to that number that are important. And then, here's what's different about a solution-focused approach. What is the most common questions that will people ask? Oh, why aren't we at a 10 yet? How do we get from here to a 10? What happens if you want to change something from, say, a 5 to a 10? What's going to change? There's all that tension comes in. It's going to be a big change. Something's going to happen. Stress, resistance, fear, all that sort of stuff. So forget those questions. What we're looking for, remember our counters, our resources, anything that counts towards our solution. What is already happening that makes it that high? Why is it that good and not 0? What are we already doing right? Where is there already evidence of the solution that we want to happen already? So, and again, explore some variations. Have there been times when it was higher on the scale? What was different then? How can we do more of that? What else, what else, what else? Again, you can spend a lot of time on just why are we that high on the scale and not lower? And the way I did this as a retro is if you put the scale up horizontally, you get the team to just put post-it notes up about all the things that made it that high on their scale. And that actually works out really well. And I did this with a team that were quite demoralised, had been beaten up a bit by management for not delivering. And I thought, I'm going to use this because I actually reckon they're doing more right than they remember. So we went in there, explored this, all the things that were that high on the scale. And they went, oh, well, we did deliver that. We did do that right. Oh, actually, we're doing this right. Oh, actually, we're doing a whole lot better than we thought. So exploring what it is that makes it that high. So again, take a minute or two. Scale from 0 to 10 for your issue. 10 is your future perfect. 0 is the worst you can possibly think of it being. How high would you rate yourself? Just pick a number and then explore what makes it that high as opposed to 0. really is my favourite tool for breaking open your thinking in this one. Every time somebody gives me a black and white answer, oh, we can't do that. Well, how much of that can we do? Or how much of that have we already got? Or what are we already looking for? It just really blew my mind when I hit this tool. All right, but we can use the scale for one more little trick. And some of you are still writing, like, oh wait, I've got heaps more stuff. And again, you know, if your future perfect is 2 to 3 pages, exploring your scale, just why it's that high, it could be a page of notes, could be a page and a half, without much trouble. And you'll find some overlap.
What if it is 0 though? So there is no actual...
Is there any time when it's been better than 0? What was different at that time? Yeah. No, there's a great example where somebody came back with, yeah, exactly that question, 0.
Has it ever been negative?
you probably didn't.
Actually,
I mean, it is a bit tricky the way you ask the question, but yeah, again, leave that space, because if somebody comes back, it's 0, just wait. And then, you know, I've had this where somebody comes back and said, well, it's kind of a 1 on Tuesdays. Right, what's different on Tuesday? Where have we got more of what we want? So, that's classic. All right, small actions. Mention that, you know, remember our golf swing? Just that tiny little difference. It's going to make a big difference down the track. What would be different at plus? And there's 2 ways to ask this question. It's really sort of subtle distinction here. If you ask the question, what would be different, or how would you know you're at +1 on the scale? Have I asked how you got there? No, I'm just asking what's different to be +1. So we're letting go of the how-to for the moment. We just want to know what would be different. What would we notice? So that is one question. One question is, what would be different +1 on your scale? And I worked with somebody one day where we went from 9.0 to 9.1 to 9.2. Hey, whatever a small increment is for you. And small increments are actually not an issue. It's where somebody wants to go from, say, a 5 to an 8. And you kind of got to go, well, what would be your first step towards that? You just got to have to bring it down a bit, because sometimes, you know, we want to solve all the world's problems today. What would be a really small change on your scale? And also, again, exploring that external observable point of view. What would other people notice? This is really good when you're coaching somebody. What would your boss notice was different if you're at +1 on a scale?
So if you run into that, how do you talk them down from solving everything?
Oh, you just, yeah, what would be different, or what would be a tiny step towards that? A great example is, I've got too many stories today. A great example would be, you know, oh, I've got a fixed problem with my car. Okay, what would be a tiny step towards that? Oh, I've probably got to book it in towards the mechanic, with the mechanic. Okay, what would be a sort of tiny step to do towards that? Oh, I've got to get the phone number off my neighbour because he reckons he knows a good bloke. Okay, what would be a tiny step towards that? Oh, well, I better actually talk to Bob over the back fence this afternoon. All right, that's our small step. So you really can just drill it down, drill it down, drill it down. So one is, what would be different at +1 on the scale? The other question then is, what's an action you can take towards that? So now you're getting into the how-to, the action items. And look, we're in business. People like to walk out of meetings with action items and follow them up and all this sort of stuff. So, you know, again, with our retro, what we did, a bunch of people put post-it notes up with a +1. What could be different? But you're looking, this is actually a really good qualifier. What can you take? Something you can do in the next few days. It's not go out, create a new change program for the whole company. It's something small that you can do in the next few days. That's a really good qualifier that'll move you forwards towards this. And it was amazing. That team I mentioned that had been beat up a bit when I ran this retro, these tiny actions, they were like, oh, well, we can take that. Oh, we don't need management's permission to do that. Oh, we can do that. All of those were actions within their power that they could take. And the small actions that a person comes up with themselves, there's no resistance. And you're getting feedback straight away. Is this going to make a change or not? Man, sort of rush you guys. Quick, see if you can think of what would be different at +1. What would be a tiny step you could take towards that? All right. Sorry to rush you on, but we're running out of time. Anybody been complimented today? Somebody pointed out something that you're actually doing right? Doesn't happen very often, does it? And it's a bit, I feel like this is the QA step that people always sort of run out of time and try and compress this bit. But again, you're having a conversation with somebody. What has impressed you about what you've heard so far? I actually use those exact words. I will say, from what I've heard so far, what has impressed me is the diligence you've shown in exploring that issue, or the courage you've showed in actually approaching that. And it is a question. I could be completely wrong. So hopefully the person will actually say, oh yeah, that sounds right, or no, I don't think so, that's not me. It's just a guess. But I tell you what, it makes a big difference. And a British manager actually asked, has anyone ever tested what happens if you give too many compliments? No one's ever tested it yet. So, based on what you wrote down and what you've been thinking through, what is a compliment? What is something that you've noticed that you could compliment yourself on? It's easier when somebody else is outside your own head, but is there something you've written down and you think, actually, I think I'm quite creative because I came up with all that stuff? What would you write down? Really quick one. Feels weird giving yourself a compliment. It's okay. You know, no one else can hear it. You're allowed to feel good about yourself. All right, so we've been through 6 tools, but remember, it distills down to this. This is the key thing. Become a solution detective with me, hunt for what works, and how to do more of it. So we're out of time. Thanks everyone for listening.